My name's Lisa Challenger, and I'm the Executive Director of the Beach to Bay Heritage Area. Welcome again, and welcome to this wonderful space, and thank you to UMES and the hospitality students here for putting on a terrific lunch. Thank you. If you've attended our meetings in the past, we've sort of changed up our program, and lots of things changed during COVID. But we abbreviated it, and our Heritage Awards will come at a different time of year and a different event so that we don't keep folks here for most of the afternoon. Somebody's clapping. I just wanted to give you a little brief overview of what we've been doing the past year. We had a very challenging year, but on the other hand, it was a really good year for us. We were able to downsize our office. We moved into a free space in the town of Berlin's space, and we downsized staffing a little bit, and we received more funding than ever before. There was a lot of COVID money out there that we received, and we were able to hire a consultant, and they are here with us today, Chop Tank Communications, who helped us with our rebranding and our name change, which we used to be the Lower Eastern Shore Heritage Area and now the Beach to Bay Heritage Area. And we did lots of marketing. We changed our website, all new website, and Ann Hillier with State Ventures is here, who does most of that for us. We got some money we've been the recipient of funds from the Rural Maryland Council now for 3 years in a row, and so we love having them as a partner. We were able to do a whole series of virtual video tours for all of our museums and historic sites in a time when folks couldn't visit during COVID. It was a way to keep their name out there and to spur some interest when folks could visit again and when their doors opened again. And our latest project, which we are just getting ready to start, is a grant to develop more African American heritage tourism through existing sites and interpreting some sites that have not been interpreted yet and some murals, and so we are looking forward to doing that. I would like to just call out our board members who are here. If you could just raise your hands. Thank you. This is our very first in-person event in probably more than a year and a half. And then our annual luncheon committee. You met the two ladies at the front, Carolyn Fitzgerald and Angie. And we also have Lee Whaley and Carrie Samus, who's not here. And that committee has just been fabulous. They took most of the workload from me. So that's sort of where we are. We're just steaming right ahead and looking forward to doing more projects and more work. There is an annual report at the seats that you can browse through at your leisure. And that's all I have to say. I know that we are going to ask Dr. Clara Small to come up and introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon by now. It should be, okay? This is truly an honor. Dr. Kate Clifford Larson is a best-selling author of prize-winning biographies, including Bound for the Promised Land, Harriet Tubman, Portrait of an American Hero, Rosemary, The Hidden Kennedy Daughter, and The Assassin's Accomplice, Married Surratt, and The Plot to Kill Abraham Lincoln. Her latest work, Walk With Me, a biography of Fannie Lou Hamer, tells the remarkable story of one of America's most important civil rights leaders of the 20th century. Published by Oxford University Press in September, the book is receiving wonderful reviews. A specialist in 19th and 20th century United States women's and African American history, Larsen is also an award-winning consultant whose work includes feature films, most recently Focus Features, Harriet starring Cynthia Erivo, documentaries, museum exhibits, and published history initiatives, including Maryland's Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State and National Historic Park, the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Byway and All-American Road, and the Harriet Tubman Home and National Park in Auburn, New York. She is frequently interviewed for national and international radio programs and media outlets, and has appeared on national and international television broadcasts, including BBC, PBS, and C-SPAN, cable networks, and most recently, CBS Sunday Morning. Dr. Kate Larson is currently a Brandeis Women's Studies Research Center visiting scholar. Her presentation today is The Hidden Chesapeake, Slavery and Freedom in the Bay Through Harriet Tubman's Eyes. Please join me in extending a warm Eastern Shore welcome to our friend, Dr. Kate Larson.
Well, it's really great to be here, and I'm thrilled to hear that your upcoming initiatives will be centered on African American history, interpreting the landscapes here. So I'm going to talk about some of that here and what has been done related to Harriet Tubman, and I hope that it inspires many of you to think about these landscapes in a different way, and to imagine them from 200 years ago, and to look through the lens of the African American presence, individuals and communities. And you know, driving down here from the airport and coming through the Eastern Shore, these landscapes are so beautiful. So I'd like to have you think about interpreting the people who lived here before as early naturalists, who really engaged with this landscape in the pursuit of freedom, and in small ways and in big ways. And so we did some of this with the Harriet Tubman projects in Dorchester County, and I'll talk a little bit about those, but I'm going to just do a quick overview of Tubman's life story as well. So she was born in March of 1822. Her bicentennial is coming up this coming spring, and the state of Maryland and tourism offices are really gearing up to welcome visitors from around the world who want to celebrate her life. So she was born, oh, by the way, some of the photographs that I'm showing today, some of them are still images from the Orientation Theater film at the Harriet Tubman State Park, and some of the images I grabbed from the Harriet movie, the Focus Features Harriet movie. I just think it like spices it up rather than old photographs all the time or old maps. It just gives a little more flavor. So, so she was born in March of 1822. Her parents, Ben and Rit Ross, were enslaved in Dorchester County. Ben was enslaved by a man named Anthony Thompson, and Rit was enslaved by Thompson's stepson, Edward Brodess. Ben and Rit had 9 children, and Minty, Harriet Tubman was born and named Minty as a child, was the 5th of 9 children of Ben and Rit. And they lived together on the Thompson plantation with about 40 other enslaved individuals. And it was a community of not only these 40 enslaved people, but the plantation was settled in an area where there were many free African Americans as well. So Tubman was born into a free and enslaved community that would come to help raise her, protect her, and educate her. This photograph, these images here are documents at the Maryland Historical Society, and it's a probate record of the names of the enslaved people in Anthony Thompson's estate when he died in 1836. And Harriet Tubman's father, Ben's name, is the first name on the list. It's outlined in red. And he was, according to Anthony Thompson's will, Ben was supposed to be set free in 1840 and given 10 acres of land. And the photograph of the house is the original house that was on the Thompson plantation We believe that Ben Ross helped build that house between 1800 and 1810. The house was destroyed in the 1870s, and that property, portions of it are still privately owned. These are the landscapes of Tubman's childhood, and of course these are familiar to all of you. There's water, marshes, rivers, streams, canals, woods and forests, and agricultural fields. And I also put this picture of Malone Church, which is on White Marsh Road south of Madison in Dorchester County. And I put the church there. It's a historic church, first established there in 1864. And this represents Harriet Tubman's spiritual life. She was raised in a community that sort of blended African spiritual and cultural traditions with evangelical Christian ideology and teachings. So it was very blended in her community. And so we need to keep this in mind when we think about Harriet Tubman, but also think about, as you embark on this effort to interpret and explore African American history here in this region, that these same things hold true for every human being here in the Chesapeake. So when Tubman was about 3 or 4 or 5 years old, Edward Brodess, who had become a young man and was not getting along with his stepfather, left his stepfather's large 1,000-acre estate in Peters Neck in Dorchester County to his own little inherited farm in Bucktown. It was about 200 acres, maybe 120 of it was tillable, and he brought Rit, who he enslaved, and all of her children with him to Bucktown. So he took them away from Ben. He took them away from that enslaved and free black community at Peters Neck and brought them 10 miles away to live in Bucktown. And Edward Brodess started hiring Minty out when she was 6 years old to various farmers in the region, and it was a very, very difficult childhood for her. He did sell 3 of Tubman's Minty's sisters. The first one was Maria Riddy, who was sold in 1825, and then Lina and Soph. And I have a photograph here of an auction, and these are the realities of slavery in this community and throughout the South, the selling of children and parents away from each other, and siblings and loved ones away from each other. And this is what happened in Tubman's family. And she later gave interviews, and she talked about the memory she had of her parents. They're so distraught when Edward Brodess sold her sisters away. So she was hired out to trap muskrats, to tend to the traps of a farmer and in the area. She was 6 years old, and she'd have to go in that cold water. She didn't have protective clothing like people who go muskratting today have boots and jackets and waterproof pants and things. She didn't have any of that, and she would get sick frequently. And she caught the measles, she got sick, and she was constantly sent back to her mother, Rit, who would nurse her back to health, and then Edward Brodess would just hire her out again to somebody else. And so her life in Bucktown, she said in interviews that she rarely lived with Edward Brodess, which meant she rarely lived with her mother and her siblings too. When she was about 13 years old, she had been hired off the plantation, or I should say the farm, Edward Brodess's farm, to a neighboring farm, and it was late in the fall, and she was breaking flax in the barnyard area. And she would tell this story frequently when she would give lectures and interviews in the North later in her life. So she's 13 years old, she's breaking flax, it's late fall, and she tells this story in these interviews that she had a very bushy afro hairstyle. And she's breaking the flax, and little bits of dust and flax flew up in the air and settled in her hair. And the plantation cook came to her and said, "Minty, you've got to come to the dry goods store with me. I need items for the kitchen." And 13-year-old Minty did not want to go because her hair was messy. You know, we can all identify with that. But the cook was insistent, so Minty grabbed a shawl from the kitchen, the plantation kitchen, and wrapped her head and her hair with that shawl. And she credited that shawl with saving her life, and her hair actually, saving her life that day. Because when they arrived at the Bucktown store, which is here in this image, there was a scene unfolding in front of them. A young enslaved man had fled his work assignment in the field nearby, and the overseer, or the field manager, had followed him, chased him to the Bucktown store. And the young man had run into the store, and young Minty was in the doorway, and the overseer took a weight from the dry goods store counter, you know, for the scales where they would weigh flour and sugar and things like that. He took a weight, a 2-pound weight, and he hurled it at the young man. But 13-year-old Minty was standing there. He yelled at her to stop the young man. She stepped out of the way to let the young man run out the door. And then she stepped back in the doorway, and that iron weight slammed right into her head and cracked her skull and drove pieces of that scarf into her head. And she describes in these interviews how she collapsed unconscious on the floor. They take her back to the plantation and they lay her out on the seat of the loom. There was a loom in the kitchen, a large loom, and a seat of a loom is like a long piano bench, hard, wooden, and they laid her out on the bench, and there she laid without any medical attention for a day and a half. And the plantation owner came and forced her awake, got her up, and forced her back out into the fields. And she talks in these interviews about how the blood and the sweat from the wound in her head came down as she's out in the fields until she collapsed unconscious again. It took her mother months and months and months to bring her back to life, and the community, with whatever medicines they had to prevent infection from setting in, and their love and care and their prayers, she survived. This other picture is a sign at the Broda's plantation and a Byway interpretive sign that's there that you can see on Greenbrier Road near Bucktown. Once she recovered from the head injury, she experienced a tremendous spiritual kind of rebirth, and it just became incredibly intense. Her religiosity, her spirituality became very, very intense. And she suffered from epileptic seizures as a result of that head injury. And she had a lot of hallucinations and visionary activity. She experienced, she could hear voices, she could hear singing, she would see bright lights, and she felt that God was talking to her and protecting her when she would have these seizures. And so it was this intense experience for her, but she became strong and resilient, and with that belief that God was protecting her, she prayed to him to please protect her, because she knew that she had more to do on this earth and more to do. Actually, I wanted to read a quote of hers that she would say. She told interviewers this several times, and I prayed to God to make me strong and able to fight, and that's what I've always prayed for ever since. And certainly she did. So she was resilient, she became stronger. So Edward Broda, so she's 13, 14, going on to 15, he leases her to a merchant by the name of Stewart in Madison, back near where her father was still enslaved at Peters Neck in Dorchester County. And she worked in the Stewart household. She was a domestic for them, and then as she got stronger and stronger, they put her out in the fields, and they owned agricultural fields. They owned shipyards and wharves, so she worked on the wharves too and got very strong. She was 5 feet tall, and the men in the docks marveled at her strength for such a tiny little person, but she was very, very strong. And this was an incredibly important moment in time for her, because working for the Stewarts in Madison Bay, the shipyards, the merchants, the wharves, She's meeting black watermen, black sailors called blackjacks. And black watermen are like the lifeline of communication in the black Atlantic world, in the black Chesapeake, because they carried the messages between separated families, separated communities. They brought news from the north, from across the Atlantic. They were like the super mail system for the African American community of the Chesapeake. She met these men. They knew where the safe places were. They knew where they could hide somebody, and often they did. They helped people escape. And they met people from around the world. They brought knowledge and information. She learned all of that. So I have a reward advertisement here, $300 reward for the capture of Nellie Keene and her 8 children who fled with her husband Joe Keene. In 1832, they fled from right down the road from Madison in a place called Parsons Creek. And I put this here to just tell you that the great majority of escapes from the Chesapeake, the eastern shore of Maryland, were from communities that bordered water. And for instance, hundreds of people fled from communities along the Choptank River, along the Choptank River in Dorchester and Caroline counties. But in Bucktown, which is more in the interior of Dorchester County, maybe 10 people fled from there over a 30-40 year period. So the difference is remarkable. Why did that happen? Because of the seamen, the water, information, and access to escape. So, oh, by the way, Nellie Keene and Joe and their kids successfully escaped. He was a sailor. He got a little boat. He stole a boat. He sailed them all the way to freedom, and I found them in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1840s. So this is a picture of the archaeological dig. The archaeologists, the state of Maryland highways, they located Ben Ross's cabin site at Peter's Neck. In 1840, he was set free. He was given his home and 10 acres of land around it. And these remarkable archaeologists and their team of researchers figured out where that house was. And this is really important because Ben was a very important man. He got his freedom. He was an entrepreneur. He was a leader in the community. Harriet Tubman and several of her brothers and her mother were able to live with him in the early 1840s. So to find this site down by the Blackwater River in Peters Neck is so exciting, and they're working on interpretation now. So we don't have structures for many of these stories, and that's another lesson here. I remember working with the county, Amanda Fenstermaker, tourism and Maryland tourism, and trying to get the National Park Service to come and create a park in Dorchester County dedicated to Tubman. But the National Park Service was so used to telling the stories about people based on structures, like the famous person's house or their office building. But we don't have any of that for Harriet Tubman and for many African Americans' stories and even white people's stories on the Eastern Shore. We learned how to tell these incredibly important stories for American history on those landscapes. We don't need the buildings anymore. We can tell the stories. Going out wherever you go, just imagine those people living there before and you can tell their stories. So we can't wait to interpret Ben Ross's site, and near that site we can tell the story of the 40 enslaved people that lived there with Ben. They're the ones that helped educate Harriet Tubman. They're the ones that helped teach her to read the night sky, to read the woods, to read the fields, to read the water and the marsh. You know, she didn't get that out of nowhere. She learned it from her parents and the educators in the community. Look at these people as educators and naturalists, and they had those skills they transferred to this young, petite, tiny woman with a disability who became the greatest Underground Railroad conductor of all time. So they deserve some credit. These are just more of the landscapes, the canal. She became an entrepreneur too. She met her husband, John Tubman. He was a free man in Dorchester County who lived near Tubman's father, and they fell in love and got married. She worked hard and saved money and purchased 2 oxen that maximized her earning power. She could hire herself out and pay Edward Brodus a yearly fee, and she kept the rest of the money. Clearly, they were hoping that she could earn, or both of them could earn enough money to purchase Harriet Tubman's freedom, but Edward Brodus died, unfortunately, before they could do that. She did change her name from Minty Ross to Harriet Tubman when she married John Tubman, and we believe she took the name Harriet in honor of her mother, Rit. So the last 2 years that she was enslaved here on the Eastern Shore, she was actually working in Caroline County in a place called Poplar Neck, and she was working for Dr. Anthony Thompson, the son of Anthony Thompson, who originally enslaved Ben Ross, her father. And he had 2,200 acres of fields and forests, and her father was there as the timber supervisor and inspector, and so she worked there as well. So did several of her brothers. But in 1849, Edward Brodus died, and that created a great drama for the family because the widow, Brodus, was left deeply in debt, and she needed to sell her enslaved people to provide for her 8 children. And so Tubman knew that she was going to be sold. So she and her 2 brothers, Ben and Henry, escaped on September 17th, 1849. Here's the advertisement that Eliza Brodus posted in the newspaper for the capture of the 2 brothers and Minty. They called her Minty. And it says here, I want to point out that in 1849, they post this in the fall. They say that she's 27 years old, 5 feet tall, and fine looking. These are really important details, and runaway advertisements are filled with information. So her brothers, Harriet Tubman later testified, became frightened because they didn't know which way to go, and they didn't know who to trust. So after 2 or 3 weeks, they came back to Poplar Neck. But Tubman knew she was going to be sold, so she decided to strike out on her own. And she turned to a Quaker woman who lived near them in Poplar Neck. We're not sure which one. It was either Hannah Leverton or Esther, I've forgotten her name. I'll remember it. And they helped her. When she approached the Quaker woman, the woman said, "Sweep the yard so you don't look suspicious. It looks like I've hired you." And when that woman's husband came home that night, he hid Tubman in the wagon and took her to the next stop on the Underground Railroad. Eventually, she reached the Pennsylvania line. She walked, she got transportation, people helped her along the way. And this is what she said. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. She was free, but she went on to say, there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home, after all, was down in Maryland. And my father, my mother, my sisters, my brothers, and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free. So when she made it to Philadelphia, she was determined to return to rescue her family members. And over the next 10 years, she returned 13 times and rescued about 70 family and friends. She only came to Maryland, she only came to the Eastern Shore and to Baltimore to rescue the people she loved. And if you were in this situation, if you had been enslaved or in a situation where you needed to escape and you were successful, who would you come back for? The people you love, not strangers that you cannot trust, because there were people willing to betray you every step of the way. So this is what she did successfully, and she wore disguises. I love the outfits in the Harriet movie. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but they're not totally historically accurate, but she looks fabulous in them. So I gotta go with that. Very quickly, over the next few years, she developed an incredible network of supporters throughout the North. And some of them were the most powerful abolitionists of all time. Some of them were the richest people in the country. And they loved Harriet Tubman. They could not believe this tiny, petite person who did not receive a formal education. She had many, many literacies, but she could not read or write words. And they loved her, and they supported her, and she demanded that they do more every single day. It wasn't enough to publish newspapers and give speeches. She wanted them to fight harder for her to help set her free and her family free and to end slavery. Some of the best connections were, as I said, via the water, and the black watermen, not only here on the Eastern Shore, but in Baltimore. She had friends and relatives from Dorchester County working in the waterfront. Some of them would go there and work seasonally, and she tapped into those networks, and they helped her conduct several rescue missions. And interestingly, to think beyond the black men, the black seamen, there were white allies, but there were also black women, like market women, who kept information. They sometimes had forged passes so people could escape and have a piece of paper that said they were free, and they would try and run away and escape. So market women, and there were so many people involved in this network, and it's difficult to find them, but you can find them in the records on this landscape, and you can tell their stories. You'd be surprised at the places where you're going to find the information. This is an image of the docks in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Those are barrels of oil, whale oil. But a lot of Eastern Shore people ended up in New Bedford because it's a whaling and sailing port, just like here on the Eastern Shore. Those same people have connections. So I find runaways who left the Eastern Shore and are living free lives in New Bedford, Massachusetts, including this runaway ad for Jane Pennington. And the funny thing is, the enslaver knew that Jane had a free father living in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and that's exactly where she ended up in 1855. There I find her in the Massachusetts 1855 census with both her parents. Her mother had escaped several years before, and there they were living in a community of other Dorchester, Caroline, and Talbot County freedom seekers. So don't think all the research and information is here. It can be anywhere. Tubman went on to fight in the Civil War. She brought her battle and her war against slavery to the national battlefields during the Civil War. She led a group of 8 male scouts. She was very much lauded by United States Army generals. And last June, she was inducted into the United States Army Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame as a full member because of her exceptional spying during the Civil War. That's remarkable. And this woman could not read or write, but she was literate, wasn't she? She could do those things. So there are so many fabulous things that have happened over the past 20 some odd years related to Harriet Tubman's story. And she is a great vehicle to launch from, to tell these incredible African American history stories in this community too. And with the support of local tourism, county, state, regional, federal support, we were able to create this 126-mile byway through Dorchester and Caroline counties that tell the stories of Harriet Tubman's birth, childhood, escapes, etc. And then it now goes through 90 miles through Delaware and another 25 miles into Philadelphia. And folks in New York are so jealous. They are trying so desperately to extend that byway all the way through New York so they can tell the rest of Tubman's story. And of course we have the Harriet Tubman State Park and National Historical Park here, and there's a park in Auburn, New York as well. We were able to, now Auburn was an easy decision for the National Park Service to establish a park for Tubman because her brick residence is there, her Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged is there, historic landscape is there with the structures. So they know how to do that really well, but Dorchester County and Caroline County, the Eastern Shore, didn't have that. But we were able to convince them that those landscapes are so important to tell this American story that they did create the National Underground Railroad Park in honor of Harriet Tubman there. So we have our the state park. I hope all of you go there. It's fabulous. And that area where you saw the archaeological dig, the photograph, that land is now owned by Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, and they're partnering with the state and national park to do interpretation there. So over the next year, hopefully you can take nature walks through that area because it's very remote, and learn more about the remarkable communities that helped raise Harriet Tubman and be part of this amazing Eastern Shore story. And Harriet Tubman excites children everywhere, and she inspires music, she inspires statues, but there are Harriet Tubmans in this community too. You just need to find them, and everyone will be excited and celebrate them with statues and songs and interpretation as well. These are just pictures of the Harriet Tubman organization, the small storefront museum in Cambridge. And there are some Tubman relatives with Cynthia Erivo from the film. And then there's Girl Trek that does these, they try to walk the Underground Railroad walk that along the Byway like Harriet Tubman, and there are more Eastern Shore relatives of Harriet Tubman. So, you know, please use her. She's a great vehicle to get people here to the community, to tell these amazing stories. They're so fabulous. It's just such a rich, rich story. And heritage tourism, I sound like I work for tourism, but I don't. But I've been trained well by people like Amanda, just to share these stories, and they will come here and they will spend money. And so yeah, I know it's blatant, but I just had to go with that. But there's something about Harriet Tubman, there's something about black women, their histories, frankly, that really inspire people. And so this fight for civil rights, you know, Harriet Tubman died in 1913 in Auburn, New York. She had lived there for 50 years, raising her family, raising orphans, doing so much for her community, but she was never able to vote. And so she really is an icon for civil rights, and she can be an inspiration to keep fighting, to create, to help us become and fulfill the promise of the Declaration of Independence that we're all created equal. And I'm going to end this with a quote from John Lewis, the wonderful congressman who, where is that? Hold on one second here. He was interviewed for the state park, and he was very passionate about Harriet Tubman. And we asked him what he felt the legacy of Tubman was, and he said, "The legacy of Harriet Tubman in America and around the globe today is one of being willing to not be afraid, to be of good courage, to be willing to go into places where others dare to go, being willing to stand up, to speak out, and find a way to get in the way." Thank you.
I just want to thank Kate again on behalf of the Beach Bay Heritage Area, and let you know that we have a gift for you. But since she flew in and is flying right back out same day, we didn't want to make her carry it with her. Our gift to you is a Smith Island cake. And it will be shipped to your home so you don't have to carry it on the plane. Smith Island cake, just a little plug, is our state dessert, and that state dessert was, that whole initiative was started by this heritage area to get that to be named the state dessert, so you can think of us while you eat the 11 layers of cake. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And safe travel home. This ends our program today. Oh, can we have questions? Oh, okay. I'll be back to say goodbye after this.
Yes.
Where did you get the information from? The Underground Railroad was all buried underground in order to be successful. So where did you get the information?
So, yes, it was secretive, but it's remarkable how much information is actually out there when you look for it. So in the archives, it's sort of hidden, so you just need to train yourself to discover it. It's all there. It is there. So you can start with runaway ads. The Maryland State Archives has a fabulous website called Beyond the Underground, and they have a database of runaway ads. You can start with those. You can start with Worcester County and see who ran away, figure out through the land records where that white enslaver lived who enslaved the person that ran away, and then you can trace that person. There are so many records now, there are so many historians working on this and putting stuff online so you can find out the information. And this area has such tremendous history and documentation. It just, you have to put the work in to find it, but it's there. Pardon me? William Still. There were Underground Railroad station masters like William Still in Philadelphia who had a journal. That's available online. You can see it. Sidney Howard Gay in New York City, his journal is online at Columbia University. And so many newspapers now are online. If you're looking for somebody, you know, they may have been interviewed 40 years after they escaped in some northern newspaper, and their story is there. So don't discount or ignore any source, because you never know when a story is going to pop up and give you that information that you need. Yes?
I'm just curious how long it took you to research the book.
So it was about 7 years. It was my dissertation for my doctorate, and the book got published immediately. But I have continued to research since then, so it's been another, 17, 18 years of research. And because there's so much out there. The basics haven't changed, but we know more names. Like, we know more names of the people that she rescued. We know the names of the people in the community that helped raise her and protect her and keep her secrets. And educate her. So those are the important things. So now the interpretation can be so much more full, and it really honors Tubman because she would want those people to be acknowledged as well. Yes?
What made you get into this? Like, when you were obviously a college student or before?
Well, I was an older student. I had my MBA. I was working for an investment bank, and I didn't like it anymore because I'd go to meetings and I'd be the expert at the meeting, and I'd be asked to take the notes all the time. So anyway, and I'd always loved history, so I went back to Simmons University. I live outside of Boston, and I had gotten my undergrad there, so I went to Simmons in their master's program in gender and race. And I was there for women's history. That's what I wanted to do. And I took an African American history course with an outstanding professor that I love and adore. And I knew right then that's what I wanted to study. And at the same time, my daughter was 7 years old in second grade. She came home with a little book about Harriet Tubman. And that was it. Yeah. That good? Anybody else?
So there were some really early books written. Were they pretty accurate? I mean, she came across as quite a storyteller, and you
Right.
loved to hear her.
So the two books were written by Sarah Bradford, a white Victorian author in New York. And she got some of the story right, but some of it didn't. And another historian, I think, captures it perfectly. Sarah Bradford was not culturally competent to record Tubman's story. She didn't know the right questions to ask. She didn't understand some of the language that she used, and the Eastern Shore has, colloquial sayings that made no sense to Sarah Bradford. So there were lots of myths that she started. Sarah Bradford put in the book about, Harriet Tubman rescued 300 people in 19 trips. Sarah Bradford made that up because she didn't believe that it would be important enough that Harriet actually said that she made 8 or 9 trips and rescued about 50 people. So Sarah Bradford didn't believe her and just made up the other numbers. So things like that, but the research is there, and they tell the truth because Tubman did tell her story to other people. Yes.
Did her husband actually leave her and marry?
Yes, yeah. So she escaped, and she came back a couple years later and wanted him to go with her, and he had married somebody else, a free woman. And the reality is, if he had been caught, he was a free man. If he had been caught, he could have been killed, but he definitely would have been sold into slavery. So for him to make the decision not to go with her is, I think, understandable. You know, was he going to give up his freedom for her? It's complicated, really complicated. So in the Harriet movie, I thought they did a really great job of showing their relationship and that they loved each other, but circumstances ruined it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
What took so long for the doctor to the military, last year?
So women were not recognized no matter what. For whatever role they did, whether they were soldiers or spies or whatever, they were not given recognition or pensions. Tubman wanted a pension as a spy, and they refused to give it to her. They gave her a pension as a nurse, a Civil War nurse, which she was. She did that too. It was just the nature of that world. Women were not real soldiers. So she was originally inducted into the Hall of Fame as an honorary member. And one of the Tubman relatives approached me and she said, "I'm mad. I think she should be a full member." I said, "You're right, she should be." So all it took was to put the evidence together and show it to the military committee, and they're like, "Oh, well, of course." So, and the general who inducted her into the Hall of Fame said that he felt she's one of the earliest special ops officers that, and he was so happy to be able to celebrate her. So that's really great. Thank you very much.
So if any of you want to read a really great book, Kate's book, Bound for the Promised Land, tells that whole Harriet Tubman story. It's a wonderful book. I want to thank you for coming and also put in a plug for membership. We are a membership organization, Beaches to Bay Heritage Area. And by becoming a member, you support our efforts. You get invited to special events like this first before anybody else. You get a great newsletter. You get to say you're part of the Heritage Area. The way you join is just to go online and look at Beaches, Bays, and Waterways, beachesbayswaterways.com, or just Google Beach to Bay Heritage Area, go to our website, and you can hit the link for membership. Anyway, thank you very much for coming today. We hope to see you in the future, and have a wonderful weekend.